In this video, we'll cover a few basic ways in which you can debug a streaming job flow in Hadoop on Elastic MapReduce. A few points to note. One, before you even attempt to run on a cluster, make sure your program is working correctly on a small part of your dataset on your own machine. Two, think about any edge cases that you might have missed using the small portion of dataset. This is something that might be causing an exception with your mappers and reducers when you try to run it in large scale. Number three, use proper exception handling mechanisms within your code. You should try to skip any records that are problematic or maybe malformed. Also, what I'd like to mention is when you deal with large amounts of data, do remember the following points. One, you should always stick to the MapReduce programming model as much as possible. Do not inadvertently try to access other records within mappers or reducers. Two, if you try to create a large data structure within your mapper or reducer, you may fail because you may try to process a large or store a large number of key value pairs, and then you will soon run out of memory. Number three is you need to pay attention to the number of reducers you create. There is a way for you to specify the number of reducers in EMR. You should be able to find that in the documentation. If you have too few reducers, then you will have to process a lot of data that might not fit in memory. If you have too many reducers, then you'll just end up with a lot of output files. Also, ensure that you distribute your map output keys fairly so that you don't overload any single reducer. Basically, you need to make sure that your keys, you use the key in the output key value pair of your map tasks, and make sure that they're actually meaningful. Don't output the same key for every record. That'll just end up going to a single reducer and that'll become overloaded. Also, you need to consider the volume of data that you're going to process. You may need a bigger cluster to finish going through hundreds of gigs of data. You should really consider using bigger instances but with spot pricing so that you can manage the expenses. Now that that's through, let's go through some live examples of some failures and how you might be able to fix that. The first example I'm going to show you is this debugging example Python, where the status is terminated with errors and EMR is reporting a validation error. This is a simple error. Now if you open up the cluster details, you might be able, with a validation error, you might be able to see exactly what the error is, and they say that the streaming output directory already exists. So this typically happens quite often. Is you're trying to run a program, it fails, so you try changing something else and you clone the cluster and you try again. But what you need to make sure is the output directory is empty before you start. This is a very common error that a lot of students have reported with EMR. Now the second example is a little more subtle. This is where the status shows as terminated, but then it shows that the step that you tried to perform inside MapReduce has failed. So let's open this up. Now, as I've mentioned in the video before, make sure you have logging enabled. This is going to help you tremendously because you can get to see some of the log files from your various cluster nodes to see if any particular tasks are failing, and you might be able to get some of the outputs that come from your map task or reduce task. So when you open up the steps, information about the steps, you see that this Python word count failed within about 3 minutes. So let's see what the log files say. You can click on the controller log file and it's going to give you some idea. So as you can see, it says execution entered with return value 1, step failed with bad return value. So somewhere along the line when the job was running, there was a error returned by one or more tasks, and that's what ultimately caused the entire job to fail. So let's take a look at syslog. Alright, so as you can see, another good indication of what might have gone wrong, it says here number of failed map tasks exceeded the allowed limit, failed count equals 1, last failed task equals this task ID. So this is the name of the job and this is the name of the mapper. So it says that the first mapper number 1 failed within this task, and hence it did not work. So let's take a look at maybe standard error. and you will also get to see streaming command failed. So a lot of students go through all of this and then find get extremely frustrated because they're saying, okay, I see that some errors happen, but I don't understand what exactly the error is. If you click on the view jobs, you'll see that this job that was submitted failed, and if you click on view tasks, then you'll get a list of tasks, and again, this is all parsed from the log file, so make sure that you have the logging enabled in S3. So it shows that these two map tasks, maps 1 and 2, failed. Now if you click on view attempts, it's going to show you that it tried to run these attempts and then they died out. So let's look at the standard error, and there you go, you actually found the actual error. So you see, this happened when I purposely put in a printf statement instead of a print statement that's not in the correct syntax. So I got a Python syntax error, and then that cascaded into a Java runtime exception because Java was externally calling this Python process to run the map task, but then the Python process returned code 1. So in Unix, if any process returns a non-zero code as its return value after execution, that's considered a failure. So, and that cascaded into this big stack trace in Java, and that not only happened once, but it happened 3 times. So you can view all the error information. Now, what's also important with a cluster is if you open up a cluster, so you can access debugging information for your Hadoop cluster while it's running. Mind you, you'll have to set your cluster to not automatically terminate. Just go to the master public DNS address followed by 9100 :9100 in your browser, and you should be able to browse through the tasks and get more information. But most of the times, if you just simply view the job information and the task information of your step, and if you just simply view the individual log files, you should be able to get more information about what happened and where the errors had happened. Alright. Now if you need more information, I will highly suggest going to Amazon's documentation, AWS documentation for EMR. You should be able to look at the troubleshooting information, and you can also use some of these tools to monitor information. Specifically, you will want to go into troubleshooting common errors in streaming, the streaming cluster errors. The troubleshooting information from Amazon is quite comprehensive and should usually cover most of the errors that students might encounter in this course. So I would highly suggest that you look through the documentation before pinging, the TAs or posting a question on Piazza when you run into trouble. Just read the manual from AWS, and that should give you pretty much all the assistance you need to troubleshoot your EMR job on AWS.